Hey everybody, so in part 2 of Foundations, you learned about a tool called READ, read, which is to help you read the Bible. And so the letter E stands for examine. And so when you're studying a passage, a verse in the Bible, we want to make sure we understand it not only in light of the whole story of the Bible, in light of the gospel, but also in light of the book that it is in. And so we're starting Genesis, and so we want to understand the actual background of Genesis, so who the author is, who the author was writing to, the outline of Genesis, and so forth. There's a handout you can download as well online and refer to, and I'm going to hit on those things in this video. So where does Genesis fit in the Bible? Well, first off, it's in the Old Testament, as most of you know, but it's also within the Old Testament. There's a group of books called the Pentateuch, or the 5 books of Moses, or the Torah, or the Law, and that's Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. And so Genesis is the beginning of that unit, those 5 books, but also the beginning of the Old Testament and the entire Bible. And so it's setting the tone for the whole Bible, which is awesome. And so who wrote Genesis, and who was it written for? Well, traditionally Moses wrote it. And God, as we know from 2 Timothy 3:16, that God led these authors to write inspired, God-breathed scripture. So God's the author as well. And Genesis is specifically written to and for Israel, but also us today. What does Genesis mean? Genesis means origin, or beginning. And so we'll see that in a second, what the beginning, what's the origin of. But what also is the genre of Genesis? Or in other words, what's the type of writing? It's mainly a narrative, a story. And so we see in the story of Genesis, setting the tone for the Bible and what's to come, we see how important it is. It provides the history for all humans, but it also provides the history for Israel and Israel's patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. And so without Genesis, we wouldn't know much, or anything, for some things, anything at all, on how life began, God's design with marriage, Adam and Eve, sin, the flood, God's covenant with Israel, and so forth. So Genesis' purpose is, yes, there's stories and stuff, but it's giving truth about God, about the origins of the universe, humans, sin, the patriarchs, Israel, and salvation. And so this is a big deal. Genesis is a huge deal in the Bible. And so simply, what is the basic outline of Genesis? You can say 2 parts. One is from Genesis chapter 1 through, you could say, about the end of chapter 11, which is the history of humankind, so before Abraham. And then from about Genesis 12 through the end of Genesis is the history of Israel, the history of the patriarchs. And so you see Genesis is starting with this big overarching view of the universe, and also closing in on humanity, and then from humanity to specific people like Noah, and then Abraham, and Abraham being the start of this new movement that God is doing called Israel. So keep all this in mind while we're going through Genesis in light of the gospel and understanding it, but also applying it to our lives.